Hello, my fellow Inklings, and welcome back to the Eagle and Child. For most of my life, I assumed that sacrifice was simply how God worked. I didn't question it. I was taught that God's divine justice required someone to pay for sin. If you paid the price for your own sin, that was called atonement. If someone else paid it for you, that was substitutionary atonement. Either way, it was a zero-sum quid pro quo system. Someone had to suffer, someone had to be punished, someone had to absorb God's wrath so that the rest of us could be forgiven. And that belief shaped everything: sermons, altar calls, and a quiet, persistent anxiety about the goodness of God in the back of my mind was there. Was he truly good? Had I done enough, believed enough, repented enough? Or would I be the one punished forever? But at some point, I had to ask a deeper question. Where did this idea even come from? Because when you look closely, this way of imagining God didn't originate with Jesus. It predates Israel. Ancient cultures across the world believed that gods were easily offended and needed in constant appeasement to the gods. Crops, animals, and sometimes even human sacrifices were used. The logic was brutal but simple. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the favor. The more it hurts, the more it proves your devotion. And over time, that imagination of the divine seeped into religious thinking, including Christian thinking, which brings us to one of the most important stories in the Bible, the story of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham lives in a world where gods regularly demand children as proof of loyalty. From that perspective, his willingness to sacrifice Isaac isn't shocking. It's actually tragically normal. Many sermons tell us that this is just a test of Abraham's obedience, as if God needs proof of faithfulness. But what's truly shocking is what happens next. Just as Abraham raises the knife, God intervenes. The human sacrifice is stopped. A ram is provided. This God does not demand the death of a child. Abraham does not offer his son. God provides the offering. And notice what Abraham names the place: not the Lord of sacrifice, not the Lord who demands loyalty, but he calls it the Lord will provide. At that moment, God breaks into Abraham's assumptions about what the divine requires and bends the story away from human bloodshed. If God is love, then perhaps the real test was never for Abraham. It was for humanity. A moment meant to reveal that God was never interested in human sacrifice in the first place. And as Scripture unfolds, this message becomes clearer and clearer. Through the prophets, God begins to say plainly what he desires. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, God says through the prophet Hosea. Micah presses the question even further. Shall I come before God with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression? And then Micah senses the Lord's will and answers, God has shown you what is good: to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. Again and again, the prophets insist that God's justice is about restoration, not retribution. Even when God expresses frustration and apparent anger, judgment is never the final word. Through Ezekiel, God says, I will restore the fortunes of my people and have compassion on them. Mercy keeps breaking through, even without sacrifice. Still, within Israel's story, we see humanity trying to manage guilt symbolically. As described in Leviticus 16, on the Day of Atonement, 2 goats are chosen. One is sacrificed, the other is beaten and then sent out into the wilderness, symbolically carrying the sins of the people away. This is where we get the word scapegoat. This ritual was never meant to suggest that an animal could literally absorb moral guilt. It was a symbol, a way of externalizing the shame, an attempt to restore communal harmony. And even here, the prophets continue to insist that God desires mercy, not sacrifice. By the time we reach Jesus, sacrifice has become big business. Temple sacrifice of animals is the economic and religious center of Jerusalem. Some estimates suggest that the vast majority of the city's economy evolved around temple sacrifice. And into that world, Jesus steps in and says something astonishing. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus doesn't just quote the prophets. He lives this conviction. He forgives sins freely. He eats with those labeled as sinners. He refuses retaliation. He tells his followers to forgive without limit, symbolically 70 times 7. He even tells us to love our enemies. And finally, as he is being executed, he prays, Father, forgive them. That is not sacrifice language. That's mercy language. Jesus reveals that the heart of God is not satisfied by punishment. We are told to forgive and love our enemies, but God can't. God is not about bloodshed, but about restoration. Not about appeasement, but about love. So if Jesus truly reveals the heart and the face of God, then mercy was never plan B. It has always been the point. It has never changed.